My name is Abdullah Ayub. I am 43 years old and I am from a place called Hawija in Iraq. Hawija is a very flat, fertile place with lots of farmers' fields surrounding the town. It can be very beautiful sometimes. On a good day, you can see for miles and miles in every direction. But sadly, Hawija has always been a very violent place. In 2014, fighters from the Dalat Islamiyah came to my town. They told us that they were there to liberate us from the apostate Shia government, the one who posed on us by the satanic Americans. If we were Sunnis, they were our friends, mujahids, whose sacred duty it was to defend us. Instead, they treated us worse than dogs. They killed anyone who resisted or questioned them. Torture was very common. Beheadings were routine. Their sheiks said that they'd bring us heaven, but they brought us only hell. They injected themselves into every aspect of our lives. Many of them were foreigners, converts who barely performed prayers or read Arabic. And they told us that we needed to be better Muslims. It was insanity. It was at the hands of those monsters that I lived through the 2 worst days of my life. The first began when my wife left our home and visited the morning market. Less and less food was being made in the front lines into the market stalls, and I remember being concerned about the amount of food my wife would be able to bring home. That should have been the least of my worries. A few hours after she departed, there was a big commotion in the neighborhood. I could hear people shouting outside our home. I learned that Daesh were about to execute someone, and that their fighters were calling everyone to the town square so that we could all witness it. I remember feeling very sorry for whoever they were about to execute. Daesh sometimes executed people for frivolous reasons, or simply because they suspected someone of being a spy. Better to send them to Jannah than risk the security of their caliphate. I just hoped it wasn't one of our neighbors or someone popular from the community. But when I saw who it was, I froze. There, surrounded by the bang mob, they held my wife. A commander from Tunisia was explaining that the Prophet had strictly forbode red clothing, and that anyone who disobeyed this edicts had to be cleansed. This isn't true at all though. The Prophet, peace be upon him, declared to no one wearing an outfit consisting of entirely red clothing. Even if a person did wear red clothing, they should simply be advised not to because it's not sunnah. I rushed to prevent the execution, but a neighbor stopped me and kept me away. He knew that if I interfered, I would be killed as well. The best I could do was think of our 2 sons. Make sure I lived for them. Make sure they didn't see. I didn't watch, but I heard the shot, and that was the bullet that broke my heart forever. The second day they ruined my life, the day they ruined it for good, was almost 2 years later. I had chosen to stay in Hawija for the sake of our 2 boys. But as the Iraqi army closed in and began to shell the town, the situation became unbearable, and we had to escape. I managed to get a hold of some sleeping pills from a friend, and one evening, I crushed them up and put them in some milk for my sons. They drank it, and I waited for the chemicals to take effect. Once they were asleep, I put my 2 sons on my shoulders, then headed out into the night. My plan was to sneak out towards the Iraqi army, but it was not easy. Daesh had given their snipers orders to shoot any civilians fleeing the city. As I rushed through the dark city streets, one fired at me. The bullet ripped through my shoulder, which meant that one of my boys had been hit. And by the time I found cover, it was too late. My son had died. But I could not stop. Islam dictates that a body must be buried very quickly after death. So in the rubble and the darkness, I quickly dug a grave by hand and laid my unconscious son into it. Then I covered him up with dirt as best as I could, grabbed my other son, and ran off into the night. It was dawn by the time I made it to the Iraqi army positions just outside of town. I was mentally shattered. There was no sense of victory at all. And when the soldiers rushed to take my other son from me, I collapsed into the dirt. But then as I sat there, gulping down water, I overheard the soldiers saying something that made my heart stop. The bullet went straight through the heart. Poor boy was killed instantly. Must have been a sniper as they fled. They're shooting everyone now. My ears began to ring as the horrific realization hit me like a speeding truck. I had carried my dead son out of the city and buried my sleeping son alive.
I was in 2 Rifles, one of those new regiments formed after the big reshuffle the British Army went through back in 2007. And I was in Afghan from November of 2009 to April 2010. We were told it was going to be a rough tour, and no disrespect to anyone else who served there, but I think we had one of the roughest tours of any regiment sent out there. When Herrick 11 kicked off in November, and we moved on Sangin, we lost 4 blokes to IED strikes in just 10 days. I wasn't involved in any serious fighting at that stage. It was mostly the 3rd and 4th battalions in the thick of it. But after Christmas, 2 Rifles started getting more and more involved with combat patrols, and it was during one of those patrols that I popped my cherry. We were out near this place called Magir, searching components for IED making equipment. Improvised explosive devices were by far the biggest killer of British troops during that period, so every scrap of bomb-making equipment we recovered was potentially saving lives. There was a rumor going around that the local Taliban were having troubles getting hold of ammunition, or that they were stockpiling it for a big attack or something. But either way, it just seemed to shrink back and rely on pressure plate IED strikes on light vehicles. They'd been at it like that for a while, and sadly the effects were devastating. The Taliban were flooding Helmand with some of the best bomb makers in the country, blokes who'd been tinkering with explosives since before most of us were even born. Their bombs took the life of a lieutenant colonel from the Welsh Guards during the summer before I was there, highest ranking officer to be killed since the Falklands. And it got to the point that we were shocked when anyone died from small arms fire. But having the Taliban withdraw themselves was what made my first proper contact all the more frightening. I wasn't expecting it, and when they finally struck, they struck hard. We'd been searching a large compound for about half an hour when one of the lads up on the roof of one of the buildings called down to us. An increasing number of people on motorbikes were moving around in the fields surrounding the compound. They didn't seem to have any weapons on them, but the bikes seemed to be ferrying more and more people into the area. Before long, it became evident that we were in the process of being surrounded by a large number of fighting-aged males, which was really, really bad news. We knew they were going to start shooting at us at some point, that they probably had weapons stashed somewhere. We just couldn't engage them until we positively ID'd weapons, or they started shooting at us first. It was like that in Afghan, fighting with one hand tied behind your back, a real headache at times. But what can you do? To defend against any potential attack, our platoon commander sent our section out of the compound and into an irrigation ditch which faced the green zone. Those irrigation ditches made ideal firing positions, if it wasn't for the fact that the Taliban deliberately used them as toilets to try and deter us. It looked like the vast majority of the Taliban fighters were formed up to our west, and they knew we couldn't smash them unless they gave us a reason to. For a while, it was almost like they were poking fun at us, just all milling about, bold as brass, shouting and laughing as more and more of them came streaming in. Then finally, all of the voices in the distance went quiet, and our lads on the roof called out that they could see a few AKs coming out. Not a second after, the first RPG flew over our heads, and the tree line ahead of us crackled to life with rifle fire. First, it was just a few shots, but it built and built until it was a terrifying amount of fire. All we could do was try and give as good as we got, so that's what we did. I don't know how many rounds we sent downrange, but every so often you'd hear someone call out a group of Taliban who were getting closer to us. They started out at about 300 meters, then someone sighted a group at 250. After that, it was 200. Then by 150 meters, we were starting to get really bloody worried. At those distances, you could actually see the people you were shooting at. They were all silhouettes running between trees to other such cover, but I could actually see the enemy for the first time. And as much as I wanted to sound brave or whatever, the reality is it sent a shiver down my spine. It was like whack-a-mole. Every time we smashed a firing position, another one would pop up somewhere closer. And no matter how many 40mm grenades or belts of 7.62 we sent their way, they just wouldn't stop advancing. By the time the enemy was only 100 meters away, we'd been fighting for so long that we'd started to run out of ammunition. Luckily, it seemed that they were running low too, because the amount of machine gun fire seemed to slacken, and grenades started bursting in the fields in front of us. We threw a few back into the bushes ahead of us, but it was more to keep their heads down than anything else. I remember hearing our section commander telling us to cease fire, and as I kept my eyes glued on the green zone, looking for any movement, I heard two words that made me sick to my stomach. Fix bayonets. Our platoon commander obviously thought the Taliban were going to try and rush us, probably after throwing a few grenades our way. So he actually had us fix bayonets just in case it came to hand-to-hand fighting. There we were, in a ditch, with millions of pounds worth of aircraft, satellites, and drones watching over us, and we were fixing bayonets like it was fricking World War I. My biggest fear at that moment was getting the order to charge. Our platoon commander was a top bloke, and he'd never give some daft order like that. But, like I said, in that moment I was sitting there thinking, "Don't send us over top, sir. Please don't send us over top." Thankfully he didn't. But then there was the prospect of being rushed by the closest group of Taliban. If their mates put down some half-decent covering fire, they could lob a few grenades in the trench, then just roll up while we were too stunned to do anything about it. Right as all those thoughts are running through my head at a mile a minute, word comes down that there's a Dutch A-10 on station, and it's on track to be over our location within 5 or 10 minutes. For those of you that don't know, an A-10 is an American plane that's basically just a massive machine gun with wings attached to it. This massive machine gun fires exploding ammunition, is extremely accurate, and is built to kill tanks. So just imagine what it does to people. Knowing one is on the way is one of the best feelings I can possibly describe. They're like guardian angels. But this visit came with a catch. Because the Taliban were so close to us, the A-10 was going to have to put all that exploding ammunition within just 100 meters of us. Any other time, we'd have pulled back into the compound into better cover before the strike hit. But since we didn't have any ammo to cover our withdrawal, we just had to sit there and pray that the Dutch pilot was switched on and heavily caffeinated. I don't think words can cover how grim it felt to be down to your last 10 rounds or so, hearing the 50 or 60 Taliban in front of you shouting, "Allah Akbar!" in preparation to charge, all while hoping the airstrike hit in time. They thought they had us. They really did. But then right as they opened up with the light machine guns, presumably to cover their final push, you could hear this low roar as the A-10 started to swoop down overhead. Then when the roaring sound was at its loudest, you could just hear this almighty growling sound as the A-10 opened fire with its cannon. One of my mates put it like, "It sounds like the sky's being ripped open." And after the trees and shrubs in front of us were ripped apart in a shower of red-hot sparks, the Taliban guns fell silent. There was a bit of sporadic fire as the blokes with a bit more ammunition took pop shots at the fleeing Taliban. But after that, it was all over. We finished searching the compound, bagged up all the suspected bomb-making equipment we'd found, but then instead of just tabbing it back to the forward operating base we were based at, some armored vehicles came to give us a lift back because the risk of ambush was too great. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but your first contact is always the worst, and with each one that passes, it gets easier and easier to deal with. Becoming accustomed to battle like that comes with a price, but that's a story for another time, I think. Since fighting season was well and truly back on, and the Taliban tried to catch us out by changing their tactics up, we started going on patrol with a lot more ammo to avoid running out again. It hurt having to carry more kit, but such is soldiering. You just grit your teeth and crack on with it.
The story is quite long, but it will all make sense in the end. I was born in Fort Lewis, Washington, in February of 1980. My father was in the U.S. Army, so we moved to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, when I was about a year and a half old. After about a year, my father transferred back to Fort Lewis and finished his career there until about September 1983. After his time in service ended, we moved to Montana, where both my parents were born and raised. They grew up in small towns, my father's being one of the smallest, with a population of about 120 people. We moved there first and lived there for about 2 years, before relocating to another larger town. I was the only boy in the family, with 2 half-sisters from my mother's previous abusive marriage, and 2 full-blood sisters, one younger than I. So you can imagine the torture I had to endure growing up. But that's irrelevant to my story. My parents were always trying to pursue better career opportunities, which was the reason for us moving around from a couple of different towns. When I was in the 2nd grade, our school was next to the junior high school, also known as middle school. So the playground was next to the track and field that the junior high students would hang out at. After lunch, we were outside during our extended recess, and I was playing on one of the balance beams, which was sitting on stiff springs, to make balancing a bit more of a challenge. I looked across and noticed one of the female junior high students walking towards me, fairly fast and fairly aggressive. I didn't think anything of it because I was too busy playing. Without saying a word, she kicked me in the groin, twice, and so hard that it lifted me off the beam and I collapsed in agony. I started crying. She then kicked me in the stomach while I was down, and the playground monitors came up to her and demanded to know why she did that. She responded with, "I don't like him." They asked if she knew me or what I had done to make her do that to me. In a disgusted voice, she snapped, "Just look at him, he's stupid." The playground monitors demanded that she leave immediately, and they called the junior high school. I never heard anything since, so I'm not sure if the girl received any kind of disciplinary action. I noticed that as each school year passed, I was considered the ugly boy, who girls always said "ew" as I passed, including the girls who weren't much to look at either, and sometimes would even push me, then try to pass my germs on to each other in disgust. I never bothered them, but this kind of treatment, or bullying if you prefer to call it, became a normal routine. It started with girls and then moved up to the boys. Bus rides were even worse. I would arrive home with bruises from the boys and scratch marks and sore head from hair pulling from the girls. I guess going through this put me in a depressed mindset, which changed my behavior and made me even less pleasant to be around. I started walking with a hunch and never felt very good about myself. Eventually, my grades started declining because I started daydreaming about being at home and playing, because it was the only time I felt happiness anymore. School was miserable, and I ended up getting held back and had to repeat a grade. Sometimes I would try to fit in, but would only get rejected even more, or even physically pushed. My friends were the only ones I was able to look up to, and they actually made me feel good about myself. After I started 5th grade, we relocated again to Helena, the state capital. I missed my friends terribly and had hoped that I would see them again someday. Helena was the town where we would finally settle. I was relieved to know that I would be away from those other kids who were mean to me and would be able to start fresh again. I was wrong. The bullying seemed to follow me, as though I was haunted. So I remained shy and chose to keep to myself. Through the remainder of 5th grade, it started with girls again, but the boys pretty much left me alone. I mainly dealt with the rejection. I would ask girls I was interested in to the school dance, only to be rejected again and then insulted. My self-esteem was at an all-time low, and my grades were not the greatest, which caused me to be held back a second time, resulting in me repeating the 5th grade again. Here I was, 2 years older than the other kids in my class, lacking any kind of social interaction, which made me feel fairly awkward. so I decided to just accept it and became a loner. Once I started 6th grade, the female rejection continued, but I never had an issue with male students, since I kept to myself and always tried to be nice to everyone who did attempt any kind of interaction. Girls would look at me with disgust while I was passing in the halls. One of them even said gross as I walked by. I never talked to any of them, but due to the way I was always treated before, I couldn't help but feel that maybe I deserved it, or that it was somehow my fault. I didn't believe I was really ugly, but since all the girls said I was, it must have been true. But I did not deny that I was definitely scrawny. The most popular girl in school was also quite vicious towards me, and the only one among them who was willing to get physical. As I had my locker open, I was getting books out of my bag for my next class. Inside the locker below the top shelf was a hook for hanging your coat. After I grabbed the last book, I felt a hard shove on my back. The top of my head hit the hook and I started bleeding. I instantly grabbed the top of my head and turned around to see the popular girl standing behind me with her arms folded. I shot her an angry look and asked her why she did that. She mouthed the words, "You're so gross," and stomped off. Luckily, the wound was very mild and had only bled for a few seconds, so it did not need stitching, but remained sore for the rest of the day. Later on that day, a group of boys, the school tough guys, approached me and informed me that Miss Popular had asked them to jump me, but they made it clear that they wouldn't because I was nice and they didn't want to. I thanked them and then headed to my bus. I never understood why girls found me to be repulsive. I bathed regularly, and I know I didn't stink. I didn't even have acne. Since I chose to keep to myself, I never really had any friends. There were a group of boys who were not exactly angels or the best role models, but they were willing to take me under their wing. Yeah, they were considered a bad crowd, but it felt good to be accepted again. I hung out with them quite often, and eventually started displaying poor behavior. I stole cigarettes from my parents, vandalized mailboxes, snuck out, and started getting involved with drugs, etc. Eventually, the trouble all caught up with me and the law got involved. I was 15, almost 16, and since I was a minor, I was put in custody of the state and was sent to Billings, where I stayed at an all-male therapeutic group home. The group home was fairly strict, and you had to earn any kind of privilege such as video games. The more serious you were about your treatment, the more privileges you earned. Boys that were not willing to dedicate themselves to their treatment or acted like they didn't care were transferred to a more strict facility, and the thought of this terrified me, so I remained focused and dedicated to my treatment. During my free time, I spent time lifting weights and playing video games. Eventually, I started putting on more muscle. It wasn't so much that you would notice at first glance, but enough that you would notice if you truly looked. I wasn't really scrawny anymore, and I actually gained some pectorals. Shortly before I turned 18, the group home staff threw me a party to celebrate my success and stated about how much I had grown and changed since I first got there. I was released 2 days before my 18th birthday, and walked out with more pride and confidence than I had ever felt about myself before. My hunch was gone, and I had my confidence back. I said goodbye to everyone, exchanged hugs with some friends, one of whom cried as I was leaving, and then I got in my parents' car and rode 4 hours back home. Getting in trouble was a blessing to me, and truly changed my life for the better. I was never very tall. I stopped growing at 16, and I'm only 5'8", but nobody teased me much about my height. After I turned 18, I got a job at McDonald's, but never felt comfortable there because I just didn't feel that it was the job for me. I also noticed something else. Girls were not mistreating me. If anything, I got flirted with. A lot. By a lot, I mean a lot. Apparently, many girls from high school recognized me and treated me like I was the hottest guy they had ever seen. At this point, due to the way I was always treated, I took it as an attempt to prank me, so I had no problem saying no and walking away. I didn't trust them because their treatment of me left a bad taste in my mouth anyway. Fast forward to January, just before I turned 21, and I joined the U.S. Army. My MOS was 13 Bravo, cannon crew member, and I served in the 101st Airborne Division, 320th Field Artillery. During my time in the Army, women started to throw themselves at me everywhere I went. In the beginning, I loved it. It was a new path in my life, so I knew that whatever was thrown at me was real, and I didn't have to worry about any bullies or pranks. I put on even more muscle and developed quite an athletic build. My PT score was over 300, and even though I didn't look like a bodybuilder, I definitely looked in shape. My veins bulged a bit and my pectorals were even larger, which made me look sort of funny to others because when I was walking normally, others would comment on how I looked like I had a puffed out chest. It was all in good fun though. Apparently I got more and more attractive. At first I ate it up, but later started to get a bit tired of it, where I decided to be more reclusive and frequent the clubs less. Fast forward a couple of months. 9/11 attack happened. We eventually went to war in Iraq, and then my time in service was ending, and I was sent back stateside for out processing. I was honorably discharged with 2 Army Commendation Medals, an Army Achievement Medal, Good Conduct Medal, etc. Since my father's health was declining, I decided to go back home instead of re-enlisting. After I got home, I worked odd jobs here and there while finishing my 8-year contract in the reserves. I was still trying to find my place, and a lot of the girls I went to school with noticed me even more than before. The attention was so overwhelming, and I wasn't used to seeing these same girls who treated me so badly all of a sudden treating me like I was the hottest man they'd ever seen. I started dating again, but never any of the girls I went to school with, and landed a relationship that lasted for 2 years, but we eventually broke up. Fast forward to July 2016, and my father had passed away. Since he was a veteran, he was given a veteran funeral, and I saluted my father as an honorable soldier during the playing of taps and gun salute. My life felt empty, like a huge chunk of me got ripped out, and I eventually put on a little weight, but not much. Over time, I came to terms with his passing, and lost the weight I had gained, and was back to having the amazing body, as most women put it. Fast forward to where I'm in my late 30s, and I got comfortable wearing athletic shirts like skin-tight Under Armour. Not for the appearance, but because I find them to be quite comfortable. I needed to get a new pair of shoes, and I was wearing my tight gray Under Armour shirt. I parked my car and was walking through the parking lot of the shopping district to Famous Footwear, and an old beat-up truck stopped in front of me on the road that runs in between the stores and the parking lot. I was about 100 feet away and didn't think too much of it until I look ahead. 2 young girls who looked like they were still in high school were in the truck and literally stopped to gawk at me. One of them yelled, "Yow!" like Joan Jett in I Love Rock and Roll. Then the other said, "Can I have your number?" I smiled and made a statement how, even though I was flattered, I was old enough to be their father. They looked shocked and said, "Sorry," which I then politely waved as they drove away. This sort of attention became super normal to me at this point. Since there was no escape, I decided to just accept it and roll with it. Fast forward a couple more years, and now I'm 40 years old. It was about 10:30 p.m., and after a long day at work, I decided to stop at one of the corner gas stations in town. I may be in shape with very little body fat, but I have a bad nicotine habit. I was wearing my black Under Armour shirt and was waiting in line to get my cigarettes and my favorite drink, Mountain Dew, when this woman, who looked to be between the age of maybe 27 and 30, walked in and was clearly intoxicated. She wasn't ugly, but she really wasn't attractive either. I'm sure that if she was wearing makeup, she would actually look halfway decent. She looked around, then her eyes caught mine. She walked, well, more like stumbled, up to me and then started circling me, slowly, like a vulture. She was leaning back at the hip, as though she had a difficult time keeping her torso balanced. She kept circling and moving her head up and down, like she was scanning me. After the 3rd time of being circled, I was getting a really uneasy feeling, and I eventually said, "Can I help you?" She stopped to the left side of me and grinned. Her look sent shivers down my spine. She kept her head still while her eyes continued to look me up and down. I never experienced this type of thing before, and it was quite eerie and unsettling. Then she slurred her words and said, "You are fucking hot." She then reached her hand out and touched my arm and said, "Oh my God, you're so fucking hot." I uncomfortably backed away and said, "Thank you," then went back to staring straight ahead, like she wasn't there, hoping she would go away. I then felt her hand touch my left shoulder and then gently run down my arm, which made my skin crawl. I politely asked, "Would you please stop touching me?" She said sorry. Then she leaned in closer, and the stench of alcohol was overwhelming. She then slurred, "I'm gonna give you some money, and you're gonna buy me something." I said, "Like what?" She said, "In case you didn't know, I'm a little drunk, and I need some beer, but they won't sell to me. They say I'm too drunk, so you're gonna get it for me." I then said, "If they can't sell it to you, it would be unlawful for me to get it for you, and I'm not about that." She then put her right hand on the left side of my face, leaned into me and tried hugging me with her cheek against mine, with her booze breath hitting my face as she quietly said, "Please, you're so hot, and I'll bring you home with me to suck your dick." My hair stood on end, and I got the worst vibes from this girl. I then snapped, "Okay, no, stop touching me, get away from me." The other customers in line turned and shot me a combined look of shock and pity. The clerk then looked up. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave the store. I already told you that I'm not going to sell to you, and now you're bothering the other customers." Without saying anything, she gave what appeared to be a sigh of sadness and stumbled out the door. I finally got up to the counter and bought a pack of cigarettes, my drink, and then walked out. After exiting the gas station, I took a left to get to my car. As I was walking, I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't think anything of it, since there were other cars parked near mine. I unlocked my car and got in. Just before I closed my door, I heard my passenger door open, which shocked me. I quickly got out while keeping my right leg in the car to see the drunk lady attempting to get into the passenger side of my car. "Excuse me," I snapped. "What are you doing?" She gave me a look of confusion. "You give me a ride home." She then finished getting into my car. I knelt down. "No, I'm not. You need to get out of my car." She then expressed how she had no way to get home. Regardless of the extreme uneasy feeling and unnatural behavior, I took pity and asked where she lived. She made it known that it was in one of the housing complexes, which was literally at the end of the block. The pity I felt left me, and I snapped, "It's right over there. You can walk." She calmly said, "No thanks, I'll ride." At this point I got angry. "Please get out of my car." She then looked as though she was shocked and said, "You want me to go?" "Yes, please, get out of my car." With a sad look on her face, she looked down and slowly opened the door and got out. I then finally relaxed and sat back in my car. I closed my eyes and gave a sigh of relief while leaning my head back against the headrest. I then felt the car move again, as though someone was getting in, and I turned and looked to see her getting back in my car and closing the door. At this point, I was beyond horrified and very angry. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Lady, if you don't get out of my car, I will drag you out myself and call the cops. Get out now." She refused to move. I went from partly horrified to just plain angry, and I got out of the car, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door. She looked up at me and calmly asked, "What?" in a confused tone. "Either get out of my car now, or I will drag you out." She then gave an angry huff and got out. I closed the door and turned around to walk back to my door when she took a swing at me. Luckily, I have fast reflexes. I backed my head up and caught her wrist. I then physically turned her out of the way and gave her an aggressive shove. Not enough to knock her down, but enough to show her that I meant business. She then started screaming at this other guy that was walking into the gas station, telling him that he needs to call the police because I hit her in the face. I firmly said, "No, I didn't," and she turned around. She screamed, "Yes, you did. Yes, you did, you liar." I calmly said, "Fine. Then I'm sure all these cameras out here will confirm your story and prove that I'm lying." She then gave a look of defeat, and I got back in my car and immediately locked the doors. After starting the car, I went into my vehicle settings and programmed my key fob to unlock just the driver door, instead of all of them. This meant that from now on, I have to push unlock twice on my key fob to unlock all the doors. I wasn't about to let this type of thing happen ever again. I put the car in reverse and my rear parking sensor went crazy. I looked behind me to see her standing there, refusing to move. I called the police and explained everything to them, and they asked me to ask her to move. I informed her that I'm on the phone with the police and she needed to move. She huffed and got out of the way. I put the window back up and backed the car up, and then put it in drive. As I was starting to roll forward, she hit my window with the side of her fist, then spit on it. I informed the police of that, which they also heard. I guess my car's Bluetooth was pretty good. So they asked me to describe her. They said they would send an officer to the scene. I asked if they needed me to stay, and they suggested I leave, since she was clearly belligerent. I was relieved to get out of there. I was tired and had to work the next day. I didn't sleep very well that night. I never experienced that type of thing before, and it was one of the creepiest moments of my life. Ever since then, I've been more cautious and aware of my surroundings. I would hate it if I ever ran into that woman again, sober or not.
People don't realize just how many people actually volunteered to fight in Vietnam. I feel like the movies sometimes paint a picture of all these pot-smoking draftees fragging all these asshole NCOs. But when I first signed up, it wasn't like that at all. My first tour was with the Army Infantry Unit stationed up near Dak To, and my platoon was all enlisted and volunteer soldiers. We were all there because we wanted to be there. And while morale wasn't exactly sky high the whole time, it was infinitely better than my second tour. My second tour was in a platoon where almost a third of the soldiers were drafted, and that made for a very, very different experience. On that second tour, there really was this atmosphere of us versus them. Don't get me wrong. We were all Americans whenever Charlie paid us a visit, but any other time, we were two distinct camps. Those who wanted the fight for their country, and those who didn't. One of the draftees was this chubby kid from Wisconsin. All that heat and all those foot patrols normally had the weight melting off a guy. But not this kid. It was like the cheese curds were glued to his bones. He was a nice kid, but he was the biggest piece of crap soldier I have ever come across. God knows how he even made it through basic, but he did, and it was our platoon that was lucky enough to be graced with his presence. He was slow. No, not stamina, and he had this incredible ability to fall asleep while on fire watch. Every time he did, our platoon sergeant would make his life hell for a few days. But because we were so short of bodies, the kid couldn't be taken off the line. A few months into the tour, Cheese Curd actually started to get himself squared away, and he started to act more and more like an actual soldier. Then this one night, he and this other guy were told to set up an observation post about half a mile away from where the rest of us were lying in ambush. We had been hunting this one group of Viet Cong for weeks, and the idea was the OP would alert us to their movements and numbers, so we could plan the ambush accordingly. So, we set up a makeshift camp in the jungle. The OP guys walked off to get set up. And as the sun sets and the night draws on, and the guys out at the OP kept checking in by radio every so often. A couple of hours go by, and were occupying ourselves by eating chow or taking turns to sleep or stand watch. I remember trying to get some sleep, just lying there in the darkness and listening to the sounds of the jungle. But even though I was exhausted, sleep just wouldn't come. Then I started hearing whispers, our guys, talking amongst themselves. Moments later, one of my buddies shook me awake. Our radio guy had lost contact with the OP, and our platoon sergeant was losing his mind. When he found out, he told our radio guy that if Cheese Curds had fallen asleep at his post, we were to shoot him and leave him for dead. Empty words, but you get the idea. Sarge was pissed. As a result, a handful of our guys had been picked out to sneak down to the OP to check on Cheese Curds and the other soldier with him, and I was one of them. So then, led by this corporal up in Beantown, we crept off into the jungle in the direction of the OP. Because we had to remain as quiet and inconspicuous as we could, it took us a while to get down to the OP. But when we finally got there, I remember seeing one guy sleeping in the dirt, while another had his back up against a fallen tree, head slumbered over, clearly asleep. The corporal starts whispering to them, saying, "Cheese Curds! Yo, Cheese Curds, wake the hell up!" But Cheese Curds doesn't move. The corporal then stands, walks over to him, and gives him this fairly hard kick to wake him up. Cheese Curds doesn't wake up. He just slumps to the ground, dead as a doornail. Then about a second later, the first muzzle flashes started lighting up the jungle. The VC crept up on Cheese Curds and company, cut their throats, then used their bodies to bait us out. The first 10 or 20 rounds fired were all aimed at our corporal, and after he went down like a ton of bricks, we just ran back towards the rest of the platoon. VC chased us through the jungle. Our guys gave him hell and turned them back. Then in the morning, we pushed out to where the OP had been to recover the bodies. It's stuff like that which made Charlie so scary. He wasn't well equipped or well supplied, but he was smart and resourceful, and that all the arty and air power in the world couldn't counter that.
My story takes place in 2012 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was stationed at Fort Carson. One weekend, some buddies and I had gone out drinking at a bowling alley. Fairly normal night at first. Nothing crazy and nothing of note to come of it. Then one of my friends, we'll call him N, asked if anybody wanted to go up Gold Camp Road. It's haunted. It's creepy. So why not? Let's go. Most of us agreed. A handful decided that we were going to go up, and some of them decided that they were just going to head home. Myself, I loved anything and everything spooky and paranormal, so I wasted no time in throwing in my hell yeah. So it was settled. We finished our drinks and headed out the door. By now I was getting actually pretty excited. What I thought to be just a dull, regular Saturday night drinking at a local bowling alley was turning into something way more interesting. There's 2 vehicles carrying all of us. So as we headed toward the infamous Gold Camp Road, I was told the story that goes along with it. Because there's always a story, isn't there? Whether there's any actual truth to the story I'm about to tell you, I'm not sure. But what we experienced out there did, in fact, happen. Tucked away in Teller County and running through the North Cheyenne Canyon, the road is about 8.6 miles, one way. It's totally unpaved. And now in 2022, it's closed off to vehicle traffic. Because of this, the road is popular with bikers and hikers, but a detour has been built to bypass over it. It has an eerie history and is said to be haunted. Set into the hills of Colorado Springs Bear Creek Park, in the 1880s, a railroad was built from Cripple Creek to Colorado Springs during the gold rush. In 1922, it ceased its activities and was converted into a highway in 1924. The new road had 3 tunnels, One of them is said to have collapsed around 1988 when a school bus full of orphans collided with it, killing the driver and all the children aboard. After the incident, the tunnels are said to be severely haunted. And while this is just superstition, the claws of the fence guarding one of the tunnels aren't doing anything to discourage the stories. While most of these claims have been made about the third tunnel, others have reported strange occurrences in the two remaining as well. The collapsed tunnel is sealed off by huge gates and is located past where cars can easily drive. This location is very popular for a hangout for high schoolers and teens, especially on summer nights. There are various stories that surround these tunnels, and they were built in the 1800s. It's said that many workers died actually building the tunnels. The most prominent, which I've already told you about, the school bus. But it ranges from a suicidal bus driver to an oncoming train to the tunnel collapsing. Nowadays, hikers report hearing laughter in the areas, and cars able to get close enough have found tiny handprints in the window fog. Today, people drive through the second tunnel waiting for the car to be moved after putting it in park and turning the lights off. Others have said to see apparitions of men in cloaks. The third tunnel you are not able to drive through, but many peer in, wondering the secrets of this spooky spot. As we slowly climbed onto the one-way dirt road, I was told the story about the kids in the bus. I'm not gonna lie to you, most of it really wasn't hitting. Every town has a story like this, right? Where you go on this road on this night and stop here, you'll see the ghost of X, Y, and Z. It's always a road and it's always a bridge. I spent a lot of my life checking out creepy abandoned places, graveyards, supposed haunted locations. So I was just excited to add this to my list and thought it'd be cool to see, hear the story, you know. Then we'd be back on our way a few hours later with nothing of note happening. As we went through the first tunnel, I was getting even more excited and really in awe of how long this road was and how beautiful the city looked as we drove higher and higher. Same result as we went through the second tunnel. Now before we got through the third tunnel, there was a spot to park, because I was told we can't drive through the third one and we'd have to get out and walk. We all got out. We were just talking, laughing, and had a few more beers. A few of my buddies and I even shot off some guns. Stupid, I know. I was 21, a little drunk, and not using my best judgment. After all the commotion died down, myself and two of my army buddies walked over to the third tunnel, and they showed me how it was gated up, but you could squeeze behind it if you wanted to. There was lots of trash and beer cans and all that, looking like there had been plenty of people coming out here for a while doing the same thing we were. Again, nothing of note. It was cool to see, but no scary ghost sightings, no phantom bus or kids screaming. So after 15 minutes or so, we walked back to our cars, and not long after that, we were talking about just heading out, since nothing was happening and it was starting to get pretty late. I'd say it was around 2 a.m. at this point. It took us at least 25 to 30 minutes to climb up this mountain. It's pretty much a one-way road that winds and curves, so you have to drive very slowly. I think at this point we were all just over it and ready to head back down. So not long after, we jumped back in our vehicles. D, one of my friends, kept reiterating that he was hearing something, swearing up and down that he was hearing kids. I was laughing at him, like, okay dude, sure you are. N came over to our vehicle and started dumping baby powder all over our car. Jay, the driver of the car, was like, dude, what are you doing? He stated that the lore and legend says if you put baby powder on the car as you drive up or down the mountain, you'll see handprints all over your car afterwards. We rolled our eyes, let him finish, and then jumped in. N and a few others were in an SUV in front of us, and we were in a sports car behind them. They were a decent distance ahead of us, so it was weird when all of a sudden two headlights appeared around the bend following. At first we were asking one another, was there another car up there? No, there definitely wasn't. We were all the way at the top, and there were no other vehicles parked up there with us. And like I said before, the last tunnel is gated off. You can't get any size vehicle through that. At this point, Jay is a little freaked, and I'm uncomfortable with the thought. The car would fly up on our ass, damn near about to hit us, then back off. Repeating this over and over for 10 minutes, I'd say. Driving down a curved and windy one-lane road without guardrails is nerve-wracking enough, but with the vehicle right up on your ass, it made it 100 times more intense. Finally, the car backed up. The headlights disappeared about halfway down the mountain. We looked at one another, exchanging those WTF glances. And right as I looked back towards the road, we both saw it. A man walking up the mountain. 2:45 in the morning, there was a man walking up the mountain. His head was down and he had a beard and long hair, so his face was covered. The one thing that stood out to me, above anything else, was that he was wearing those green and yellow reflective jackets. We both were like, whoa, what is this dude doing? As we continued down, I'm actually now kind of freaked out because there's too many things happening that are just downright weird. There was no sign of another vehicle parked off the side of the road as we drove on. Like the guy parked off and just wanted to go for a late night walk up a mountain. As weird and crazy as this sounds, he looked like a bus driver. I don't think either of us said that out loud to one another, but I know we were both thinking it. Jay and I finally made it back down the mountain 10 minutes or so later. Nerves were shot and ready to just get back to the barracks and call it a night. Jay wanted to stop and get some gas and a drink to calm his nerves, so we stopped at a nearby gas station. I walked inside as he was getting gas, grabbed us 2 waters, and headed back out. As I came back out, I stopped dead in my tracks as I got up to the rear of his car. Jay, you gotta see this, man. Dude, what? What are you talking about? As he twisted the cap back on and closed his door to the gas tank, he looked at me, then slowly turned around to see what I was staring at. Jay's back windshield was completely covered in small, tiny handprints. All that baby powder that N dumped on his car earlier. It was there. It really happened. Now I was shocked and even more freaked. Jay immediately said, "Hell no. Oh, hell no." Took both waters from my hands and dumped it all over his windshield to wipe it all off. He kept saying hell no under his breath the entire time. He and I both got back into the car and never spoke again to one another about it for some reason. And I haven't been out to Gold Camp Road ever since. Hey everyone, thanks for listening if you stuck around to this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. All these links are below. Hey everybody. First and foremost, thank you to every single one of my guests I had on. I had this idea a few weeks back where I wanted to do military stories for Veterans Day, and then I also wanted to have veterans who are narrators and within the narrating community to do the stories. And it's cool to obviously get to work with new people, and it's obviously really awesome for veterans like myself to work with other veterans, especially for something like this. I know a lot of people don't really give a shit about Veterans Day, and at one point in my life, when I was young and dumb, I didn't really care either. But now, after experiencing things, after being to Afghanistan, after meeting amazing people, really cool people, seeing some shit, doing some shit, I have a bigger appreciation for it, and now I have, fond memories and a lot of appreciation for the men and women who sacrificed literally everything for this country. For you, for me, for our freedoms that we have and the freedoms we get to enjoy that you take advantage of every single day. So yeah, this is a cool episode. This is an episode that I enjoyed doing, and this is something I really am glad that I got to work with new people and work with other veterans. It's just pretty cool. Also, that last story is actually mine. That's something I experienced when I was stationed at Fort Carson from 2011 until 2014. Also, it's not, I know I think September is, but throw some stats at you. 22 veterans commit suicide every single day. 22 veterans. That's a lot. That is a lot. Obviously, one is too many. And this goes to not just veterans, but anybody. If you're feeling down, if you've got some issues like demons, or issues, problems, whatever within yourself, you need to talk to somebody. Because I promise you that your life is worth something. Your life matters. You matter to people around you, to your friends, your family, co-workers, anybody and everybody. Like, it matters. So take the time to take care of yourself mentally. A lot of people talk about how important it is to take care of your body, physically, eat healthy, work out, do this and that. But not enough people talk about how important it is to take care of yourself mentally. And if you need to, talk to somebody, man. For a while, I refused to talk to anybody because I thought therapy was stupid. I thought talking about your feelings is stupid. I don't want to tell some stranger about my issues. I can take care of this shit myself. And I did that for a very long time. And I can honestly and genuinely say, and I'm sure there's a lot of men and women out there who have seen combat and seen some shit. The war at home is way, way tougher than the actual war itself. And it took me far too long to realize that after I got home, that I need to get this shit off my chest. I need to talk to somebody. So I know I don't have a lot of followers or a lot of subscribers, and this probably won't get that many views, but I want to donate every single cent that I make off this video to the Wounded Warrior Project, which is one of my favorite foundations and one of my favorite things, like the charity things that I'd like to give this money to. So every single cent that gets from this video is going into that. I know this is very long-winded and way longer outro than you're actually used to hearing, and I'm used to doing, but this shit is important to me and it means a lot to me. And so obviously if you don't want to listen, you can close off now or close off however long ago. Doesn't really matter to me, obviously, but this shit needs to get said, and it needs to get said more often. With that being said, I think I'm gonna do some like Craigslist roommate stories next. I'm getting those stories together, and you'll probably hear those here within the next week. Sorry it took so long to get to this episode together, but last Friday I got sick, and you can probably still hear it within my voice that I'm still kind of nasally, and I'm just now finally getting to the place where my voice doesn't sound like complete shit, and I don't feel like complete shit. So I love you all. Thank you so much. Happy Veterans Day. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.